Okay, I have with me currently Mr. Gene Maddox of Greeneville, Tennessee, definitely one of the historians of our community. First of all, I want to ask you if you can kind of tell us about the memories you have as it relates to the Capitol Theater in downtown Greeneville. In particular, the black person's access to the theater. And I understand there were things like separate entrances and separate bathrooms across the street, etc. If you could just expound on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, my experience goes back to the early 50s through the 50s and 60s and that era of Jim Crow. The Capitol Theater was the only theater that we were allowed to attend. There was another theater around the corner and down the street that we could not attend. But the Capitol Theater had a separate entrance just to the left of the main area where the marquee is today. We would enter a little side door and negotiate a set of steps that would lead us up into the balcony, which is where the African Americans were allowed to sit. If we needed to, you ask about the bathrooms, if we needed to go to the bathroom, of course there were bathrooms in the theater, but they were not accessible to people of color. So we would actually have to go back down the stairs, go out the door, cross Main Street, enter an alley that was between the county courthouse, and proceed to the entrance to the jail and actually go into the jail area to use the bathroom. And of course, if it was cold or raining, you know, you had to interrupt your watching of the movie you'd be gone for quite a while, so you'd miss a significant part of the movies.
Right. Another question I have for you, as it relates to the Greeneville City Transit bus, what was the situation with that as it related to blacks or African Americans? In other words, the bus seating.
Well, it was very limited here in Greeneville. I think we've probably had one bus possibly, and I can remember when I was very small, they did come into the Wesley Heights community, which is considered the African American community at that time. And other than just once you got on, it's pretty much go to the back. And the bus primarily negotiated Main Street to the Tusculum area where Tusculum College is and back, and that was pretty much it. But as far as black patronage riding the bus, it was moved to the back.
Wow. As
it was all over the South. You know, it was typical Southern transportation restriction.
Now, as it relates to the integration of lunch counters and restaurants and that sort of thing, and in particular, I can think of an example when even I was a small child, the Woolworths. Of course, at the time that I was a child, I was allowed to go in there and there wasn't an issue that I can recall. But what were your experiences with that aspect of it, restaurants, lunch counters?
They were pretty much all segregated. There was a Roses here, a Woolworths, and a couple others I can't really remember, but we were not allowed to sit at the counter.
But you could go in and...
Oh yeah, you can go in and order standing up. You just couldn't take a seat.
You couldn't take a seat. You could order, you could pay.
Yeah.
But you couldn't take a seat. So basically you had to get your food and either stand there and eat it or leave.
Yes.
Wow.
And of course you would mostly leave. You wouldn't want to just stand there eating, you know. But anyway, now later on there were a couple of establishments that did invite African Americans to sit at the counter. Cole's Drugstore was one when it was on Depot Street, and the Blue Circle lifted that obligation, and then on the Asheville Highway there was a beer joint called the Bluebird, which you could go and sit anywhere you wanted to.
Really?
So there were some exceptions, but the usual rule was you didn't sit at the counter in most establishments.
Right. How were your personal relationships with white people at that time? Did you have friends, close friends that were white, and how did that gel with everything that was going on at that time?
Oh yeah, we did, and of course Greeneville is a small community, and even in the African American community, there were white families almost in every area, including in the Wesley Heights area. I can't think of maybe but one or two streets that there wasn't at least one white family.
Really?
So relationships were cordial and not really tense because people, well, it was just sort of easygoing. Yeah. Not to say there were not incidents that would arise. Mm-hmm. They were.
Right. Right. Now, with the white people that you say lived in black communities at times, at least one or two, how were they treated by the black people of the community?
Well, everybody pretty much got along.
Mm-hmm.
If you were black, and of course you were aware of the situation, the separation, and of course people pretty much acquiesced. But in general, people got along, mm-hmm. you know. I mean, because you had to.
Right.
And it was only later during watching the civil rights struggle play out on TV that people started to realize that things were going to change. Mm-hmm. And change in Greeneville was fairly easy. Not to say there were not some incidents, of course, there always is when under such a system of apartheid or segregation.
Right.
But all in all, there were not a lot of incidents.
Okay. You mentioned when you were talking about the Greeneville city bus system, the transit system, that you were young during that time. Mm-hmm. So from a young person's point of view, how did your parents explain to you what was going on, and how did that affect your self-image?
This is growing up in the segregated South. You kind of understood where your place was, and that if you challenged that, it could be a problem. So you sort of acquiesced to it. We knew it was wrong. We didn't like it. I can remember at the end of the day at the dinner table, we would talk about, I've heard my parents talk about the inequities of prejudice, of discrimination, of living like that. It's something that we lived with, and sometimes we would talk about change, hoping change would come. I remember how we anticipated civil rights legislation and looked forward to that. And then later on, of course, following incidents that we watched, the civil rights struggle as it played out on TV, watching the bus boycotts down in Birmingham, the sit-ins at the counters in North Carolina, all of this, we were very much aware of how unfair and inequitable segregation was.
Right. But how exactly would you say that that impacted the way you felt about yourself as a black person in a white America?
Well, it did. It's, you know, psychologically it wasn't good. Mm-hmm. But there were black role models. When we saw Dr. King and hundreds of other leaders in the South, Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, just all these people gave us hope and realized that we would get through this, and hoping that America would live up to the promise that was listed in the Constitution.
Right.
And of course, you know, we have struggled, and we still have a ways to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, most people in Greeneville are familiar with George Clem School, which was this school where all Black people attended prior to integration, from kindergarten or possibly even before.
Well, there was no kindergarten.
There
It was
was
simply 1 through
first grade.
12.
Okay.
Yeah.
From first grade through 12th. Is that correct? At the time that the schools were integrated and you were allowed to enter the Greeneville High School, for example, the city school systems, how did that make you feel? How was the mindset of the students that were about to transition over to the new school and their comfort level? And in addition, their sense of community within the Black community itself?
Well, we knew it was coming. I mean, the Brown Board, the Board of Education, came in 1954. Integration came to Greeneville in 64 and 65. Right. So you can see we had some time to prepare, to know that it was coming, and we looked at it as an opportunity that had been not offered to Black people. And we realized the inequities, the unfairness of the schools, even though our teachers did a wonderful job under the circumstances of educating in a segregated system. I can remember sitting in class and looking at, when we got new books, they were not new, they were hand-me-downs from the high school. Being in school, hoping possibly to go to college or to get in a situation where you would be trained to be eligible for really good jobs, because all jobs at that time were menial. They were domestic, low-paying, and so we looked at this as a coming opportunity to advance and to find some parity in our education along with the white system. So we look forward to it, and seeing the struggles on TV in integrating the schools, like in Little Rock, where actually they had to have the National Guard come in to provide protection for the Black students who were integrating. And we've seen it in various places all over the South. Here in Clinton, Tennessee, where they actually blew up the white high school to prevent integration.